The world of Monster Hunter is fascinating. Lands untamed and cities untold, filled with all manner of creatures and people. It's one of my favorite fictional worlds of all time, and one that I've been trying to map out for quite some time. This video series represents my most definitive attempt to pin down where the various maps and towns are, by using official sources like various lorebooks and game text, as well as constructing some educated deductions. In the previous episode, we marked all relevant locations from the second generation of Monster Hunter, many of which had confirmed placements, making the work quite easy. We did, however, also engage in our first bit of heavy speculation in order to figure out where the tower is. Today, we look at all the locations introduced in the third generation, which represents the first major hurdle to this video series. Monster Hunter 3 was in many ways a kind of reboot, reimagining the series' style and mechanics in ways that still echo on today. Most crucially for us, this was also the point at which Monster Hunter began being more coy about its world building and lore, becoming more reluctant to openly confirming connections between pieces of information, and overall erring on the side of ambiguity. This also means that from this point onwards, nearly no town or hunting ground has a confirmed location on this map. It's all up to us, using incidental details from our list of sources and deductive reasoning. Before we jump in, however, I have a small correction to make. In the very first episode, I told you about a city named Riveru in Japanese that is here in the Shrade region. Like with the other places that don't have an official localization, I did my best to construct a possible English name for it, eventually landing on Rivel. Well, turns out it does in fact have an official English name. In Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, the player can obtain a treasure item named Liberstone in English. But if we look at the Japanese Riverubi, we can see that it includes the name Riveru. Thus, Riveru's official English name is in fact Liber. Thanks to Nu Udra from the Monster Hunter Wiki Discord for this find. Luckily, that is already it for corrections. We got lots of work to do today, so let's start with towns. First up is Moga Village, a small fishing hamlet that serves as the offline town for Monster Hunter 3 and 3 Ultimate. Located off the coast of a deserted island and suspended on wooden rafts, this village houses many different people, from humans to Wyverians to Linians to even the elusive Sea Folk, a sapient race of humanoids with varying degrees of aquatic adaptations. It is a joyful and pleasant community that appreciates the bounty of nature. Historical sketches reveal that Moga Village has undergone various changes over the years, changing its layout quite frequently. Guild scholars believe this is likely the result of common disasters such as earthquakes and tsunamis, changing the terrain and destroying the village periodically, forcing regular rebuilding. And rebuild they do. The Mogans have watched over this place for time untold, under the guidance of a guardian clan. That clan's current head is the Moga chief, once a monster hunter, now an old man enjoying the sea and nurturing the next generation. His years of experience and wealth of connections within the Hunters Guild ensure Moga Village's safety and prosperity. In the waters beneath the village, ancient ruins stand as the last remnants of a past Mogan civilization. As far as mapping goes, Moga is kind of tricky. We know it's directly adjacent to the deserted island hunting ground, so by figuring out its location, we'll be killing 2 Gargoyle with 1 barrel bomb. However, there are no direct statements as to where the island is, which means we have to scour the oceans. Hunter's Encyclopedia 3's entry on the deserted island states, "The deserted island is located in the middle of the ocean. Those who visit this island from the continent will be amazed by its many plants and animals that they have never seen before." This implies that A, Moga Island is not near any coast and is a true ocean island, and B, that it is still possible to visit it with some ease from the continent. While we aren't told which continent this is referring to, this expression usually means the Old World main continent in the Monster Hunter books. Now, if we look at our map of the Old World, there are a few islands indicated on it. It is of course entirely possible that Moga Island is too small to be drawn in here, but that would not be a very fun answer, now would it? So let's assume that Moga Island is in fact one of the islands depicted here. This Far East crescent is Shiki, so we can immediately disregard it. We can also broadly disqualify all of these small northern islands. Moga is both depicted and described as having a mild climate year-round, so there is absolutely no way that it is north of Poke. This essentially leaves us with three options. This western island off the coast of Shrade, this tiny island on the eastern coast, and any of the islands in this southern island cluster. In Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, the Argosy captain can sometimes appear in Kokoto, where he will say, "But my ship, Argosy, was attacked near Kokoto here, which far from Moga." This seems to disqualify the western island, as it is quite close to where we know Kokoto is. This leaves us with two options. Now, remember that the very first world map of Monster Hunter also indicates this world's equator, which is down here. Looking at this, the eastern island also seems too far north to have the kind of year-round pleasant climate that Moga is described to have, so I feel comfortable disqualifying it due to this. The only option we are left with is thus this island cluster here, south of Erude. Which of these islands is Moga is honestly a complete guessing game at this point. Moga Island does need to be somewhat sizable, as the variety of monsters that can appear there is quite immense. Beyond just its size, however, I believe it ought to be long enough for its northern part to be above the equator, while its southern part ought to be below it. That is because very rarely, Beroth, an exclusive desert dweller, can in fact wander into the woods near Moga village, which would imply that there is some area on the island warm and arid enough to support this species. If we again look at where the equator is, there are two islands that fulfill this criteria. Finally, in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, Neko the Argosy cat states, "Whole world soon be talking about brave duo of Tiger of Far East and Hero of Middle West, that you." This is likely meant as a joke, but the term Middle West does somewhat align with the western one of our two remaining candidates, as it is the western side of the continent's middle. This is, admittedly, not watertight reasoning, but at this point it could be either of these two islands, so I'm comfortable making this call, placing Moga and the deserted island here, in the island cluster south of Erude. Next up is Loklak, the online hub for Monster Hunter 3 and the last true online city in the series. This bustling trade nexus is located in a truly unique environment. It sits atop a massive rock plateau that rises from an endless sea of sand, known as the Great Desert. On top of this plateau lies a crater-like lake that Loklak is built around. And in that lake stands an enormous bone monument, believed to be the fang or horn of a gargantuan elder dragon from eons ago. Loklak City is a hub for travel and trade, and sees high volumes of traffic by air and sand ships. It is in fact such a popular layover point that the local Hunters Guild also mans a tourism office to accommodate and guide the various travelers. Every once in a while, a sandstorm envelops the area, announcing the arrival of Gen Moran, a whale-like elder dragon that swims through the great sands. Hollering and whooping, Loklak hunters will sound the gong and mount their sand ships, racing after the dragon in an attempt to mine the priceless ores that grow on its back. When it comes to locating Loklak, the Great Desert it sits inside of is our biggest clue. You might be tempted to look for it near our other confirmed desert areas. That is what I did in my previous mapping attempts, after all. It's however important to note that the Great Desert is unlike any other desert area in the series. Its sand is uniquely similar to water, granting no foothold and sucking in anything that falls onto it. This can be seen in-game by jumping off the sand ship during the Gen Moran hunt, but it is also specifically called out in one of the hunting magazines the player can read in Monster Hunter Portable 3rd. With that in mind, it seems likely that the Great Desert does not necessarily have to be close to the other known deserts. We do, in fact, know the location of one Great Desert. In Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, the Caravaneer mentions that the Daren Moran, a relative of the Gen Moran that also travels by swimming through sand, also threatens Dundorma, and that it must be repelled in a Great Desert. This means that there must be a Great Desert somewhere near Dundorma, and since we know that it has swamps to the west, water to the south, and mountainous cliffs in the north, the only conclusion is that there is a Great Desert to the east of Dundorma, smack dab in the middle of the central continent. Now, the Great Desert seen in Monster Hunter 3 and the one in 4 Ultimate could, theoretically, be two different Great Deserts. Perhaps these sand seas are just a type of biome that exists in the Monster Hunter world. But in the absence of further evidence, I'd say it's best to stick to the simplest solution, which is that there is one Great Desert, and that it is here. The area seen in 4U is called the Great Desert under the jurisdiction of the Valhabar Guild in Monster Hunter 4, so perhaps this Great Desert is separated into two territories, one guarded by Loklak and one overseen by Valhabar. This location works well with other things that we know about Loklak. It is described to be accessible via sand and airships, with no mention of any kind of water-bound vessel. This implies that it has no easy access to the ocean, meaning that it would need to be quite far inland. Loklak's status as a trading and travel center also works well within this placement. Located so centrally, it would naturally be a node for nearly all journeys across the continent. By comparison, putting it on the southern peninsula near the other deserts would put it far away from most areas of interest. With all of this in mind, I believe Loklak is here, in the center of the continent, surrounded by the portion of the Great Desert that is under its jurisdiction. Moving away from Monster Hunter Tri and into Portable 3rd, we now need to find Yukumo and its adjacent hunting ground, the Misty Peaks. Nestled among tall, pill-like mountains and serene streams, this village is known for its hot springs and unique woodcrafting methods. The surrounding area is lush and beautiful, with remnants of a much larger settlement scattered around. What this community might have been, and what happened to it, has however been lost to time. Placing Yukumo is again somewhat tricky. A hunting magazine in Portable 3rd mentions that it is far to the east of Loklak, which is already a valuable clue. Monster Hunter Rise Complete Works confirms that Kamura Village is located on the main continent, and that Yukumo is near Kamura. So we can rule out Funron or any other landmasses. Yukumo is on the main continent. Beyond this, however, we have to rely on context clues. Climate-wise, Yukumo seems quite mild, with green trees and ample grass. Looking at this, it doesn't strike me as an overly northern landscape. It is, however, also distinctly not tropical. So we can limit its possible location to east of Loklak, south of Poke, and north of Jumbo. We can additionally narrow it down by considering that Yukumo is a mountain village. It must thus be located somewhere on these mountain ranges. In the absence of further evidence, I will choose to place Yukumo and the Misty Peaks here. Not too north, not too south, definitely east. Moving on, we must now discuss Tanzia, the online hub from Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. This lively port town is a vital travel node for all manner of seafaring vessels, guiding them through the many various signal towers that litter the area around it. The largest of these towers is called the Dragon's Bane Lighthouse, and was erected long ago after Tanzia banded together to repel a powerful black sea dragon. For a mapping project like this, Tanzia is essentially a nightmare scenario. It only exists in a single game, and mostly functions as a way to replace Loklak. It only has a handful of NPCs, many of which only speak in purely functional dialogue. Its only lore entry is in Encyclopedia 4, which is notoriously sparse on actually useful information. And aside from the open sea, only very little is actually visible of the immediate environments. But nonetheless, let's make the most of what we got. In the animated film Monster Hunter Legends of the Guild, Guild Knight Julius mentions that Port Tanzia was one of the towns from which the fleets of the New World Research Commission departed to the new continent. This by itself tells us very little. We have no idea what direction the New World is in, and a port doesn't have to align perfectly with its destination. It does, however, confirm that Tanzia is a port on the open ocean, which lets us rule out the Geocroc Sea at least. Next, we are told in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate that travel between Moga and Tanzia is straightforward but long. This would imply that Tanzia is somewhere that can be reached from Moga without too many complex maneuvers, but that it is still some distance away from it. Looking around Tanzia itself, we can see green mountains behind it, which does seem to confirm that this port is actually built onto a landmass and isn't just a floating rock or suspended raft in the middle of the ocean. Our other major clue for Tanzia's location is the Tainted Sea. This arena map, in which the player battles Dire Miralis, is explicitly stated to be near Tanzia, as the dragon's appearance presents a threat to the region. In fact, you can even see Tanzia's light towers in the distance. Now, if we look closely at these towers in both Tanzia and the Tainted Sea, it doesn't look like the Tainted Sea is opposite Tanzia. Instead, it appears as if these towers line the shore of whatever coast Tanzia is on, a pattern they seem to repeat in the Tainted Sea map. To me, this almost looks like Tanzia and the Tainted Sea are in fact jutting out of the same shoreline, rather than sitting at opposite shores. Now, looking at the rocks in the Tainted Sea, they definitely remind me of volcanic cliffs, with that sheer drop-off and that compounded rock structure. I am not a geologist, and this is not a whole lot to go off of, but we don't exactly have a lot more to work with. So let's take this as an indication that the Tainted Sea shore might be either near or at a volcanic region. Now, if the Tainted Sea and Tanzia are indeed on the same shoreline, we need to find a shore that would include both green mountainous terrain as well as volcanic rock. My best guess for this would be here, where the shores of the Arcolis and Erude regions meet. Erude is the only place in the old world with confirmed volcanic activity, and lots of it at that. Meanwhile, the region around the Geocroc Sea's west and southwest are adjacent to places that we know to be fairly green, such as the Old Jungle and Metapitat. This placement also allows for straightforward but lengthy travel with Moga. It would also be a decent way to get hunters from Dundorma onto the open ocean and on their way to the New World, although admittedly having to sail south to circumvent much of the continent does seem inefficient. But considering what we know, I choose to place Tanzia here. This covers us for all settlements in the 3rd generation, and in locating them, we've also placed a handful of hunting grounds already. Let's do the remaining ones now. As we already have the deserted island, our next target is the Sandy Plains hunting ground. This arid region is full of slopes and canyons, which all serve to hide various old buildings and traces of settlements in their shadows. It is clear that people once lived here, and the guild has various theories as to why they might have left. But now, only monsters roam these plains and its small, muddy oases. As far as mapping goes, the Sandy Plains has the advantage of appearing in 2 separate generations, 3rd and 5th. This gives us loads of information to work with. For starters, Monster Hunter Rise Complete Works describes the Sandy Plains as sitting atop a rock plateau that juts out from a vast sandy desert, similar to Loklak. That same passage even mentions that the hunting ground must be reached via sandship. It also states that the Sandy Plains are somewhat distant from Kamura, but still within the same region. And because we already know that Yukumo and Kamura are quite close to each other, we can essentially treat any statements regarding vicinity to Kamura as also applying more or less to Yukumo. This gives us a rough range of where we might put the Sandy Plains. If we now go into the map and look at it closely, a thing that immediately jumps out at me is how much greener it is compared to the old and Gen 2 deserts. This is, of course, subjective, but in my opinion this does open up the possibility of the Sandy Plains being further north and adjacent to a milder climate than the other desert maps. Combine this with the mention of a vast sandy desert below the Plains Plateau, and I think the likeliest position for it is here, at the eastern edge of the Great Desert. The mention of sand ships being needed to access the hunting ground does fit with it being connected to the Great Desert, and this location is both far from Yukumo but in the same rough region. All in all, it seems to fulfill all criteria that we established, so I am confident in placing it here. Moving on, we reach another 3rd gen hunting ground that returned in Monster Hunter Rise, the Flooded Forest. This humid area consists of a forest that has been partially submerged by a swelling river, creating aquatic habitats for various monsters and unique plants. Ruins litter the place, and the guild first became interested in the area after a rare mineral was discovered within the flooding river. Both the Monster Hunter Rise book and the hunting magazine and Portable 3rd confirm and reiterate that the flooding body of water in this map is a river, meaning that it does not need to be near a coast. Looking around the borders of the map in Rise also seems to show that it is surrounded by land, so I'd comfortably place it somewhere inland. Hunter's Encyclopedia 3 calls the surrounding area a tropical wetland, so it's safe to assume that this region is pretty far south. Monster Hunter Rise Complete Works then again confirms that the Flooded Forest is in the vicinity of Kamura and thus also near Yukumo. Based on the fact that the Sandy Plains were described as somewhat distant but in the same region, while the Flooded Forest is said to just be in the vicinity, I believe the Flooded Forest is closer to Kamura, and thus Yukumo, than the Sandy Plains are. This is already all the info we get, so now it's just a matter of placing it, which I will do here. This way, it is south enough to be tropical, it's closer to Yukumo than the Sandy Plains, and as an added bonus, it is decently easy to reach from Moga just looking at it. Next up, we have the 3rd generation Tundra. This frigid wasteland is described as a place where life and death stand still. The cold devours all ambition, halts every movement. Only the toughest monsters prowl here, and it is said that there is a hidden wyvern graveyard somewhere in this region. As a hunting ground that is entirely exclusive to 3rd gen, the Tundra is a tough one to pin down. Hunter's Encyclopedia 3 specifies that there are colder known areas in the world than this one, which implies that while the Tundra is obviously in the north somewhere, it isn't the furthest north point of the old world. That is pretty much already all the useful information we get from the books. Time to actually look at the region. Walking through the Tundra, one thing that sticks out is the lack of vegetation. There are a handful of sparse trees in the southwest, but the majority of the area is completely barren. Compare this with the Snowy Mountains hunting ground, where all the zones that aren't on the mountain peak are quite green, with ample vegetation and hints of a boreal forest. This is naturally a subjective call, but I think we can use this as a hint towards the Tundra being at least further north than the Snowy Mountains. Looking around the Tundra further, it appears to be entirely surrounded by mountains, with no obvious sea access. However, by the camp we can see this river carrying icebergs, flowing southwest. Rivers generally flow towards the ocean one way or another, so unless this river snakes around deceptively, which is possible, we could conclude from this that there is an ocean coast somewhere to the southwest of this hunting ground. I elect to place the 3rd gen Tundra here, on this little bit of shoreline that juts out to the northwest of the Snowy Mountains. Not only does this location seemingly fulfill the criteria we established, it also puts it directly north of Loklak, which would, presumably, make travel by airship simpler. The final location for this generation is the 3rd gen Volcano. This area is defined by a massive active volcano sitting in the middle of an old forest, creating a harsh divide between normal and extreme habitats. A community known as the Fire Country is known to live somewhere around here, and occasionally commissions quests from the Hunters Guild. Like the Tundra, the volcano is also entirely unique to 3rd gen, and thus suffers from a lack of sources. However, there are some juicy tidbits. Hunter's Encyclopedia 3 describes this volcano as standing in an ancient forest, and that it is quite a lonely region. Coupled with the fact that we can only visually see a single volcano in-game, we can reasonably conclude that this is in fact a lonesome volcano, rather than one of an entire volcanic mountain range. Additionally, in Monster Hunter Portable 3rd, the Yukumo chief mentions that she once lost her way home and ended up near the volcano. This might imply that the volcano is also in the rough vicinity of Yukumo. Let's take a look at the region in-game now. By looking around, we can observe that the hunting ground is surrounded by an open shore on the west, a forest in the south, and indistinct land masses to the north and northeast. There are also no volcanoes in sight beside the main one. With all of this in mind, I choose to place the 3rd gen volcano here, on this shore gazing at Erude. The fact that this volcano stands by itself tells me that it probably isn't on Erude proper, but with how volcanic activity in this world seems to be so concentrated in that area, I also do not want to place it too far away. With this spot, it's near Erude, but not in it. It's also near Yukumo, and borders on a western shore while also having warmer green regions to its southeast and east, fitting with the placement of its forest. And with that, we have mapped all major locations introduced in the 3rd generation of Monster Hunter. This is what our map currently looks like. As you just saw, we are now at the point where we have to heavily rely on assumptions and judgment calls. This will continue as we go on. You can surely also see that it's a bit of a house of cards. Since we have to place loads of locations in relation to each other, Being wrong about any one of them can in turn make the entire map fall apart. I am so far quite confident in all of these placements, but if in the future something does inarguably disprove any of this, I'll definitely have to do an update. That's the benefit of doing this as a series after all. But for now, thank you for watching and happy hunting. A big thank you to all of the channel's Patreons and YouTube channel members. You are the reason videos like these are possible. I want to especially thank Theopuz, Lufish, Morgulblank, Tactywolf, Vila Zero, Jacob Coleman, Hellbug Hunter, Shebo, M1Have12, Regal Eagle, Ronger97, Quali, MattHat124, My Name Gone, The Dollarfish, Sheba, King Dre, Ryan Hook, Veraxis, Thick, Neko, Zion HV Augenson, Alistair, Jacob the Numbnut, Soruka, Sir Newt, Evie, Rambling Robin, Hashi, Black Ace 202, Dissy, Habohimbro Mirror, Magenta, Russell, Vulgar Beast, Person 212, Claire Miboon, Oakwood Tree, Mr. Pyramid, Makot02, Geo, Nils Schlatter, Iron Camel, and Nah, I'm going to bed. Take care everyone, I'm gonna go take some cold medicine. Goodbye.